All right, everybody. I should be live. You should be able to see me and hear me. So if you can do either of those things, please let me know in the chat so that we can get started and discuss everything related to the topic at hand, which is why are the narco syndicates preparing for something regarding ammunition, or what's the purpose of it, and some things you should consider regarding it because, a lot of the reporting is questionable. However, there are some changes and trends regarding where this ammunition is going that should give you some room for pause, I guess we'll say. So, looks like we are live. Good to see everybody tonight. Welcome back to a Monday night. We used to call these Marauder Mondays. Right now, we're just calling them a good time. And I also know we have, let's see here. Oscrates here for Live Crew. Good evening, Dave Sickles. Good to see you. Savage Lee, good to see you as well. The first thumbs up. Well, you know what? Any additional thumbs ups that we can get, I will appreciate. 100%. Hello, all from Corrupt Colorado, says Carrot Top. Well, welcome. And then Glock 316 with the 5x5. So I think we're doing okay. Now, Harbor Prepper, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Derek, good to see you as well. There are some things we're going to discuss regarding that large ammunition bust, but we're also going to talk about things that happened just yesterday regarding some of the reasons for why it might be concerning that this is happening in the first place. And then I'm going to talk to you about why the cartel would even be moving ammunition the way that they were, or why they'd be moving it in general. We're going to go over some scenarios where this would kind of make more sense as to what's happening, and then that's the portion of the conversation that I want you to consider from a preparedness standpoint, okay? Hey, Kurt Poindexter, thank you so much for the compliment. I appreciate it. Edward Teach, hello to you as well. Virginia is in the house, says Paul R. Gen X Gemini, good to see you. You're awesome. Now, let's talk about a couple of interesting things. We have the story here that we're going to lead off with. Now, I know you might be saying, like Cody did earlier, that this is an old story. I guess so, but here's the thing. Things have developed since then, and there's a lot of inconsistencies that I want to discuss because I'm not exactly sure why the reporting is reporting what it is. If everything that we're being told is accurate, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So there's some things that I want to try to discover there, I guess we'll say. Now, and it is hard to get good ammo south of the border, savagely. That is true. First off, it's highly regulated. You can't just go to the store and buy whatever you want. Even if you're allowed to be a gun owner in Mexico, you are restricted to a certain amount of ammunition, and the ammunition is likely of lesser quality compared to what you can find in the States. So there's a lot of reasons behind why this doesn't make a lot of sense, or why they'd want to get ammo here, and then there's reasons for why some of this doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's get into that, okay? So here's the story that we're starting off with, all right? We have the stunned cops allegedly find 180,000 rounds of ammo packed in minivan driven by two Mexican nationals. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you the truth right now, just based off of my perception and research throughout this topic, is that this entire title is likely not accurate or something is not true about it. Not sure which part, but it's just things don't really line up, but let's talk about it first so we can have an idea of what it is we're diving into here. Two Mexican nationals pulled over in a routine traffic stop in Colorado were found with 180,000 illegal rounds of ammunition in the back of their van, according to federal prosecutors. Cesar Ramon Martinez Solis, 41, and Humberto Ivan Amador Guevara, 24, were pulled over late last month for failing to dim their headlights and using turn signals in Cannon City, 35 miles southwest of Colorado Springs, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado. Officers then found 180 boxes stacked in the back of the van, each labeled as having 1,000 rounds of ammo, mostly 308, but also 30 boxes of 7.62, the feds said. Now, of course, 7.62 could be 7.62 NATO, which is similar, or basically the same as 308, with just lower pressure. But regardless, that's what we're being told. The men from Durango in Mexico were in the U.S. on non-immigrant visas, according to the affidavit obtained by the Cannon City Daily Record. After speaking to a translator, Solis, the driver, agreed to waive his rights and speak without an attorney to Homeland Security agents, the affidavit said, which is also somewhat interesting. Why would you waive your rights? I don't know, but that's just a little bit of strangeness here already. However, Guevara then first he said, and Guevara, his brother-in-law, first traveled from Mexico to Denver on March 25th before heading to Salt Lake City, Utah in search of a van to buy. Guevara then bought the ammo at a firearms store in Utah, Solis allegedly told the agent. Now, let's tear apart some of this really quick. And then we're going to talk about why this is weird and why we should be kind of like considering the strangeness here. But there's some things that are just inaccurate or just don't make sense to me. And I want to touch on that really fast. So first, let's jump over. Oh, and by the way, Kyle Beckman, thank you so much for the super chat. Greetings from behind enemy lines in California. That van full of ammo is how I will likely be abducted. Well, you know what? It's definitely a possibility. If you see a white unlabeled van outside of your front door, you should be a little bit concerned. Now, I want to go ahead and show you the actual report that was put out by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Here's where things get interesting, okay? The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado announces the defendants, blah, 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 and why they were arrested. According to the criminal complaint, on March 26, 2025, detectives with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office conducted a traffic stop of a vehicle occupied by defendants in Cannon City. Defendant Martina Solis consented to a search of the vehicle. During the search, the detectives found what they estimated to be approximately 150 boxes of .308 ammunition and approximately 30 boxes of .762 ammunition. Each box was labeled as containing 1,000 rounds. Okay, here's what's strange. First off, this says nothing about a minivan. So for some reason, that last report, which is from the New York Post, which not the best reliable source, but they said a minivan. This doesn't look like a minivan to me. It looks like a cargo van. Here's the other thing. The U.S. Attorney's Office actually stated that they found boxes of ammunition and then said the boxes were labeled 1,000 rounds. But they didn't necessarily say that they found 1,000 round boxes of each type of ammunition. And here's the thing where this gets weird. First off, if the numbers that were being told in the last report of 180,000 rounds is accurate, and if this is accurate in the sense of these boxes actually being cases of 1,000 rounds each, 180,000 rounds of .308 ammunition weighs like 10,000 pounds plus, okay? So the thing you have to understand is that most vans, especially minivans, can't carry 10,000 pounds inside of them, let alone the space and the volume required to have this much ammunition. The equivalent would be, let's just say, 180 50 cal ammo cans, because you can, get close to 1,000 rounds in a 50 cal can, maybe, I guess, right? That's a lot of space. So first off, you need a ton of space. Second off, you're at least over the load limit by 3,000 or 4,000 pounds, even if you have like a Sprinter van that's meant for commercial use and is more heavy duty. It's a crazy amount of weight to expect a van to just have inside of it and still be able to operate properly. So I'm not sure if these numbers are inaccurate, that the reporting's inaccurate, and here we're not being told exactly what is going on here. All we're being told is that they searched their vehicle. They didn't mention of what type of vehicle it was, and then they also told us that they found boxes of .308 ammo and boxes of .762 ammo. For all we know, those boxes were like the 20-round boxes you would generally find at a store, and then the boxes were just labeled as having 1,000 rounds because they were in bigger boxes, maybe? I don't know. But this is the photo we're being shown, and this is where I just start to get a little bit confused about the situation because just so much of this information doesn't really line up. Now, jump back here in the chat for a second, okay? And just so you're aware, I went ahead and jumped into ChatGPT to ask a couple of questions regarding some of that information, especially the weight stuff. And so it calculates that 180,000 rounds of .308 is going to weigh, like without packaging or anything else related to it, at least 10,280 pounds, okay? And some of your best, most heavy-duty vans have a load capacity of like 6,000 pounds. So the math doesn't even add up for them to be able to actually have that much ammunition stored in the back of a van and still be able to keep it operable, right? Now, the other thing that's interesting about this story is that the nationals there that were transporting the ammunition weren't taking it to Mexico, supposedly. And that's where it gets really interesting and a little bit concerning, and this is what I want you to consider regarding some of the things we're going to talk about here in a minute. Okay, according to the gentleman who decided, or gentleman, that's a strong word, let's just say the guy who decided to waive his rights, according to him, they were going to transport everything to, I think it was Pueblo, Colorado, which is not usually where these things end up going to, okay? So, Guevara then bought the ammo at a firearms store in Utah, Solis allegedly told the agent. So they bought a van in Utah and then drove. Oh, wait, hold on. First, they went to Denver, and then they went to Salt Lake City in search of a van to buy. And then they went to Utah and bought 180,000 rounds of ammo at a store. and they just loaded it in the back of that van and took off, right? Like, so there's a lot of inconsistencies here and a lot of strangeness about this whole situation that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Because at the same time, what store has 180,000 rounds of ammo on hand just for 308 and 7.62 NATO alone, which some I'm sure do, but at the same time, then just sells it to two dudes in a van like that just flew in from Mexico? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. In general, like, did they write a check? Like, did they paid cash? Like, this is fishy, I would say. The bare minimum, I'd be worried about what connections they have to said store over in Utah, because that's just all strange. And then Solis also said, further explained that he did not know the intent with the ammunition, but he believed it was destined for Pueblo in Colorado. Okay? So there's a lot of inconsistencies here. The numbers don't make sense because of the weight. The vehicle reported was a minivan, which it clearly wasn't based on the photo, which was provided by the U.S. Attorney's Office. So that's the photo we're going off of, right? And so this is not a minivan. It's at minimum a cargo van, possibly a Sprinter van, depending on the rest of it. And then somehow they fit 180 cases of ammunition that weighed 10,200 pounds that some, store employee helped them load into the back of the van after they paid for it in cash. I just don't... A lot of things don't add up. Now, the strangest part about it, though, is that they weren't taking the ammo to Mexico, which is generally the MO. So that's the other thing we have to keep in mind here. Now, Robert Larson says the Mormons traded for sodas and beers. They said, don't tell anybody. We'll give you all the ammo you want. Just don't tell anyone I'm having some of my spicy drink, right? Let's see here. You can't soup it up to hold 180,000 rounds. Yeah, I don't think so. Like, you can improve, like, and make a van like that more heavy duty, but in general, the suspension and everything else is just not rated for that. Maybe if they would have had like a truck, right, that was meant for being a load-bearing vehicle, that's a different story. But not your typical van, and not a van that they just went and bought, likely off a used car lot. I mean, that wasn't like a new van or anything like that. So I don't know. Eric H, thanks for checking in with the 5x5. I appreciate it. So Kevin Brown wants to know where the store is and if they have bulk discounts. Yeah, Paul R says it's an E350 Econoline van. It could look like that. I don't know, but I don't think like it. I don't necessarily know. Like, the thing that would make sense, at least in my mind, would be a Sprinter type vehicle, but I just don't think it's one of those either. So it's really hard to tell. And they didn't give us very good photos, did they? And I don't know if that's on purpose. Buckshot Hill Farm says 10,000 pounds would be 5 tons. I don't believe a small van would haul that. Besides, the tires would blow out. Well, at the bare minimum, the tires would likely be, like making contact with the other parts of the vehicle's body, right? So, like, the fenders would be touching the tires or something. Like, it's just, it would crush the suspension. So there's just a lot of inconsistencies here. And part of me wonders what's happening there. Now, someone earlier, before this live stream started, basically said that it could be part of a plan of, like, trying to, sow chaos and instability and then create issues surrounding firearms and ammunition that then shows why there needs to be additional regulations and stuff for them to come crack down on, Second Amendment rights and things like that. And that might be a possibility because I don't know how this all adds up otherwise in many ways. That's why it's very confusing. And the fact that this guy just talked so openly. Cartel members generally don't like to give out information freely, especially without even like letting a lawyer intervene or anything along those lines. So this guy was willing to risk what a cartel might do to him in order to just tell everybody exactly what he was up to. Oh, I'm going to Pueblo, and I just went to Salt Lake City to buy this van, and we went to the store and bought all the There's a lot of things about this story that just doesn't seem right. So just to give you some quick. So Erica Toros just touched on something I think is very important to consider here. They caught one van from the 3 vans, right? So you have a decoy van, and then you have the other vans that make the run. And that's actually true. That is something that they use as a tactic, and that's very possible, which is why the guy might have been so cooperative and willing to give everything up, right? And why, like, think about this. If that was a decoy van, maybe things make more sense now if, hey, we found 30 boxes of 7.62 NATO and 150 boxes of 308, right? But if those are 20-round boxes, that's perfectly feasible for that vehicle to be able to do. But if they have empty cases in the car to give them a reason to have to do all this investigation and stuff, now suddenly, like, it makes sense that the van could carry it. It makes sense that they would get pulled over and get in trouble for all of that. And it also makes sense for the inconsistent reporting because the U.S. Attorney's Office literally didn't even say the amount of ammunition, they only said the boxes, right? And then they only said that they were labeled for 1,000 rounds. So, I mean, there's a lot of things there that we could definitely consider, right? Yeah, Paul R. says a Sprinter dually payload is still only max like 6,500 pounds, right? Exactly. So, now, just for some examples as to why this is also strange and why this might be something you want to like pay attention to. Laredo police traffic stop uncovers 5,000 rounds of ammo bound for cartel. So first off, this is like a more typical scenario you would see, and this happened in February of this year, right? So we're still talking about relatively new events, but just so you know, in two more stories, we're going to be on something that happened yesterday to try to bring all this home, right? So I know I'm late to the story, Cody. I know. And I appreciate you saying that because it is true that comparatively to other information that's been put out recently, that I am late to that particular story. But I am tying together a bigger picture and a bigger narrative here regarding these scenarios rather than just focusing on that one situation. And I think you can see now, especially after this conversation we just had, that story like needed to be reported on from a different point of view of like what's really happening here, because this doesn't make sense. Like so much about it didn't really add up. So that's why I wanted to touch on it. But these guys, they got caught on their way to Mexico. They had 5,000 rounds of ammo destined for the Cartel de Noresta, right? And the authorities identified the driver and the passenger, and they work with the cartel, and they have a lengthy criminal history, right? So officers discovered approximately 5,000 rounds of .556 caliber ammunition in the rear seat of the vehicle, along with cocaine found in Salazar Esquivel's pants pocket, according to court documents. Police also discovered between the driver's seat and center console a 9mm Taurus G3C containing one magazine with 8 rounds and another magazine with 6 rounds. So the reason they use the Taurus G3C is so if they ever do pull it, they won't get charged with assault with a deadly weapon, because everyone knows it's going to malfunction anyway. So I made all the Taurus bros mad right now. It's fine. We're good. I had to take the cheap shot when I could. In a post-arrest interview, Hernandez stated that he was closely tied to the Cartel de Noresta. He stated he was transporting the ammo to an individual who would smuggle the ammo to the cartel in Mexico, the affidavit states. So 5,000 rounds is reasonable. That's 5 cases of ammo. You could put 5 cases of ammo in any vehicle, really. It's not a big deal. And then you transport it into Mexico through some other smuggling operation, and then they're using that ammunition for cartel-related activities. Makes a lot of sense, okay? Now, as another example, we're going to talk about... did I just lose my other example? Is that what just happened? Most likely. And that's just the way things work for me sometimes, okay? Did I really close that out? That's really frustrating. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. So here's another example I just wanted to touch on really quick, where it's kind of like a compilation of a lot of drug busts and smuggling busts that have been happening along the Mexican and Arizona border just here recently this year so far. But for example, CBP says officers encountered a 19-year-old male driving a Jeep SUV attempting to exit the United States into Mexico at the San Luis port of entry on January 24th. The teen was a U.S. citizen, but after a CBP canine alerted to the presence of ammunition, officers found 100 boxes of ammo concealed under the seats. Each box contained 20 rounds of the total of 2,000 rounds recovered. So, and there's a bunch of other, indications here of smuggling, but most of it's related to cash or drugs, including fentanyl. But this one was specifically about ammunition, and this is a more reasonable number. A guy would try to smuggle across the border. It's 2 cases of ammo, 20 boxes, right? And each 20 round boxes and 100 boxes is 2,000 rounds. So this guy got caught, got arrested, everything was done the way it's supposed to be. So that's the usual order of business, is that we're sneaking ammo from the U.S. into Mexico. So it's part of the trafficking operation, and then the ammo goes to Mexico to support the cartel's operations, whether or not it's when they're fighting rival cartels or if they're, stockpiling or whatever else it is. And we're going to talk about some of those things here in a little bit, because the considerations you need to be making is, what would the purpose of this ammunition be for? Specifically with the idea that it was supposed to be going to a location in the U.S. rather than to Mexico. And that's kind of where the concern comes into play, because generally they would be smuggling ammo from, a border state down into Mexico. And that's where they're making their money, because they're trafficking ammo for the cartel at that point. But bringing it to another point in the country is not the same MO, and that is something that suddenly turns into a more domestic issue in the sense of a threat, right? So we do have to talk about that in the sense of what it could be used before here stateside. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about some things related to what they usually do in Mexico to get mentally prepared for what it is they might be staging here. There's also some things I want to think of regarding possible, regulations or things along those lines. And maybe the cartels are more aware than we are when it comes to possible reasons for why access to ammunition might be more difficult to come by in the near future, or might be, regulated to the point of us not being able to access it as easily. I don't know. But these are all things to keep in mind. Okay. Now, I'm going to jump in the chat real quick. Okay. The ATF does have that amount of ammo. It says first, last. And I'm sure they do. I don't exactly know if you were referring to something in particular, but I was agreeing with you that I'm sure they have that much ammo, 100%. Not that I wish they did. I have to admit reality. Let's see. Robert Larson says, LOL Taurus bros. Yeah. Look, I'm not against you for having a Taurus. I swear. I just thought it was low-hanging fruit, and I took my opportunity, okay? Let's see here. It's the Mini 14 that's a less lethal weapon because the A-team could have hit anything with it. Yeah, well, that might be true, too. That might be true. And you know what? The Mini 14 seemed like a great idea when I was still living in California. And now that I live in a free state, I'm like, yeah, I have really no desire for that, although I think it still has some cool factor. So let's go ahead and jump into some ideas. Eric Coltoro says, man, they're gearing up. It's clear. So here's and Fast and the Furious 2.0, definitely a possibility, right? A federal operation that went south. I don't know. I can't, prove anything along those lines, but I do know that whole story was so strange and the way it was reported was so off, and there's so many inconsistencies and things that just literally don't add up when we're talking about math, numbers, and weight and everything else, that it feels like it was some type of operation more so than a random traffic stop, right? It feels like it could be used for other things in the future. And for example, let's just throw out some random concepts here before we jump into the next article I want to go over based on, what the cartels are up to when it comes to some of this ammunition and why you should be taking some of this personal preparedness stuff more seriously because, well, they're definitely better equipped than you, but they're also training at a higher level, most likely. Not all of you, but most of you, I assume. Because it includes me in that equation, by the way. They're training at a higher level than I am, 100%. So here's some things to consider. One, what type of, let's just say, less than true situation or event could occur here in the near future that could be pointed back to such things as large amounts of ammunition quantities being transported around the country, right? And then where could that lead us to in the sense of why that's a problem, right? So keep that in mind because now there's this obvious and very public display of look what's happening and look what's going on and look how easy it is for these criminal organizations to get this crazy amount of ammunition and then move it all over the country. And luckily for us, they didn't have very bright lights on their vehicles. We pulled them over, caught them, got everything we needed. We showed you that one picture and gave you the math, even though we didn't really particularly say that the round count was actually the round count. And yeah, the vehicle that we're talking about couldn't actually have transported that much ammunition, but we're going to let you believe it because, you can do the math and it adds up. Look, the press did it for you. All we said was boxes and what they were labeled as, but the press told you how much ammo that is, and that's crazy talk, right? And then secondly, the other thing it could be used for, obviously, is for the nefarious aspect of, possible events that would occur regarding organized violence and, well, the justification then to use extreme or excessive force against some of these groups now also exists, right? So there could be some level of, let's just say, positioning, especially in the sense of optics, for why the current administration or the federal agencies involved with the current administration might have to do some drastic things here on American soil in order to prevent the threat from reaching that culmination, right? Because, you can't really be using the military on U.S. soil, especially when it comes to things like the popular things like drone strikes or anything along those lines. But if you can build that case for all the justifications for why you might need to, and you start telling the public about all these crazy things that are happening here stateside and not going back to Mexico, well, maybe people will get on board. I don't know. So those are the things that I'm considering as for why there might be so much, I'm not going to call it disinformation, but I'm going to call it, let's just say bad reporting at the bare minimum, right? Like, it's bad reporting. It's not a minivan. And if it is 180,000 rounds of ammo, I don't understand how that vehicle made it from Salt Lake City, Utah, all the way back to Colorado without breaking down or literally getting pulled over before for not even being able to get up to speed, right? So, like, I don't know. My Corner T-Bar, thank you for the super chat. I always appreciate the support, just so everybody knows that. It's greatly appreciated and humbling. Is there a way to track down where they got it from? Serial numbers, possible that the government will add tracking to ammo. Well, I don't know that, but they said they got it at a store in Salt Lake City, and I assume there would be an investigation there, just in the sense of, like, hey, is someone providing material support to, by the way, these organizations now are foreign terrorist organizations. So is somebody providing material support to a terrorist organization that runs a gun store that we should probably be aware of? I don't know. But if someone's willing to sell 180,000 rounds of ammo with what, a cash transaction, I have to assume, because I doubt they took a check, and I don't think they would do that via credit card. That's something, I don't think it's necessarily illegal, but it is something maybe I would raise a red flag in the sense of, like, your willingness to cooperate with the criminal element. I don't know, but I think it's a problem, right? Gen X Gemini says that van must have been a Chevy, you know? Maybe. I mean, especially the older ones were built like tanks. So I just made every Ford owner mad now, and I just can't help myself tonight. I'm having a bad time, okay? Chris Swanson says, Mike Glover is right. The 308 ammo is for the cartel's miniguns. It would need a buttload of links to make machine gun ammo belts. Now, that might be true. And I did watch Mike Glover's video just to see what his take was on this situation, just because of his background and whatnot. Regardless of any weird stuff going on with his situation nowadays, he still has that information and that wisdom, right? And my take on that was, like, I think that's a reasonable line of thought, but I just don't think enough thought was put into the reporting of what happened there to really move into that direction before asking these additional questions we've been going over tonight. Because, like, that's a lot of things that don't make sense all in one story, right? And so it's one thing to have, like, one thing be a little bit off and be like, okay, but I mean, everything in the story seemed to be contradictory. And that's where I get a little bit more concerned about other nefarious aspects of what could be happening there, because a lot of it doesn't make sense. So the worst part about the story, in my opinion, and the thing that has me the most concerned about it, is that we are seeing a large quantity of ammunition, if everything is as reported, right, that was destined for a location in the U.S., not for Mexico. Because that's generally how these things go, as I just showed you some examples of that happened just earlier this year. They generally get ammo here because it's accessible and affordable, and then they bring it to Mexico to support cartel activity. For them to bring it, to buy it from one state and then move it into another state, possibly creating a federal crime in the process because of crossing state lines and whatnot, there's additional risk there that seems unnecessary, right? Unless you're trying to disassociate from your area of operation, right? So you're buying in Utah so you can go establish in Colorado, so there's less of a linkage there, and possibly allowing you to go back and acquire more in the future because, you know, there's that separation. But why are they keeping it in America if generally they're supporting cartel activities across the border, right? And so there's a couple of things here that we're going to talk about as to why. But the first thing I want to mention is that they use a lot of ammo because they do train, and they train in probably the worst ways humanly possible. And this is one of the reasons why I focus on the cartels on this channel, because not only are they the most likely threat if we're going to talk something militaristic happening here stateside, because they are here, they're operating here, and they have the means and the equipment to do so, not to mention the resources, but it's also because they are a well-trained paramilitary force, and in many ways might as well be a military force, right? And so they would be, at least as of right now, as of current scenarios and current situations unfolding around the globe, right? A Mexican cartel outbreak of violence would be like the most likely scenario where you would, as a prepared citizen, have to engage a near peer on U.S. soil, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I like to kind of focus on this, because it has probability to it more than many other scenarios we discussed, right? Mexican mayor arrested in connection to alleged drug cartel training camp, official says. This was from May 4th, yesterday, okay? A mayor from a western Mexico town was arrested as part of a probe into a suspected drug cartel training camp where human bones and clothing were found, a federal official said. Tachitlan Mayor Jose Marguia Santiago was arrested as part of an investigation by government prosecutors into probable omissions or complicity of authorities with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, a federal source told AFP on Saturday. Obviously, corruption runs rampant within Mexican politics, especially on a local level. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is like either this guy went in with good intentions and then was corrupted through blackmail or force, right? Or threats, or he went in as a plant from the cartel to begin with. But regardless, like no matter who you are or where you start, if you're in politics at a local level in some of these areas, it's guaranteed you're going to get involved one way or the other. It's just how it works there. And if you don't play ball, you don't exist anymore. So there's reasons why this is always what happens, okay? The source requested anonymity because they were not authorized to speak to the media. Also why these things happen. Marguia was arrested late Saturday afternoon, according to federal arrest records. The cartel, which the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration says has some 19,000 in its ranks, developed rapidly into an extremely violent and capable force after it split from the Sinaloa cartel following the 2010 killing of Sinaloa cartel capo Ignacio Nacho Colonel Villarreal by the military. Sorry, I tried to read all that. The name got too long and it got weird for me. The Ranch of Horror, as some local media called it, in the Izguir Ranch in Tachitlan in the western state of Jalisco, was first discovered in September of 2024. 6 months later, people searching for missing relatives found clothing and human remains, raising questions about the initial investigation, including a failure to search the site thoroughly. Human Rights Watch called it an apparent mass killing site. The cartel allegedly used the ranch to train newly recruited gunmen, senior officials have said. The Guerreros Buscadores Collective, a group dedicated to locating missing relatives, has described the Tachitlan Ranch as an extermination center with clandestine crematoriums where forced recruits were thought to have been held by the cartel. Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch told reporters in late March that there was no evidence that it was an extermination camp. But he also said that an alleged recruiter who was arrested said the cartel members tortured and killed recruits who refused to cooperate or tried to flee. The Attorney General's office, which has denied that executions were systematically carried out, took over the investigation after a complaint from Guerreros Buscadores. The group found buried bones, clothing, shoes, and other objects at the ranch, which went unnoticed during a search in September by authorities who raided it following reports of gunfire. Okay? Listen, the way this looks, this was a training camp in a training facility that is also a mass grave. I have zero doubt in my mind, based on their previous behaviors and the things that they are willing to do in these organizations, I have zero doubt in my mind that they were using live targets. And they were getting new recruits trained up and used to the idea of killing. And these are the people that have infiltrated our country and have also, at this point in time, demonstrated that they are stockpiling ammunition inside of the U.S. rather than always bringing it back to Mexico. Now, like I said, I have a lot of speculation and skepticism surrounding the initial reporting on that story of 180,000 rounds of ammunition. Things just don't add up. They just don't. And so I'm trying to look at that through the lens of why there would be any level of lying going on around it, right? Which is like the only word I could think of at the time that would describe exactly what that might be. But regardless, so Sven Niasen says 150,000 of those were 308. The other 30,000 supposedly were 762, which was likely 762 NATO, which is 308 basically, just at a lower pressure, right? So I believe that because I don't think they randomly grabbed 7.62 by 39 as well, although they could have, since they do use AK pattern rifles as their small arms weapons of choice. However, in the U.S. especially, you would think they would be more concerned about the AR platform because of ease of access, and not to mention what you can do in the sense of, building your own receivers, right? Which I assume could be another problem they try to present us with here in the future. But regardless, we also see them taking 5.56 rounds back down to Mexico on a regular basis. So, I have to assume it was probably 7.62 NATO. That's why I'm saying that, okay? Red Dawn Readiness says, I have a feeling Fast and the Furious folks are paying for it. I mean, it just might be true because I don't know. I just don't know, like, if there's any other way to look at it when there's so many inconsistencies. Patriot Zero says, how much is 180,000 rounds of 308? Well, first off, it weighs 10,280 pounds without packaging. So that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's true. Second off, price-wise, well, the cheapest I can get, like 7.62 NATO or 308, is usually like around 80 cents a round, right? Like that's the cheapest I can generally get it for. So, I mean, do the math. What's 180K times 0.8, right? Let's see here. 144 grand is what that would cost me as a standard consumer. So let's see. I mean, it's very possible that they, I don't know, made a deal because of bulk, right? So you buy in bulk, maybe it was 50 cents a round, right? That's still $90,000. And so some gun shop in Utah, supposedly, right? That's what this guy said. We don't know for a fact yet. You think there would be more information about it by now, and there hasn't been. But some guy or some gun shop in Utah made $90K in like one day selling 308 ammo and just said no big deal, loaded it up in this guy's van and let him drive off, right? So I don't know. It's a little odd. DB Cooper, good to see you. And RDR, good to see you, says DB Cooper. So just want to make sure you guys saw each other. Let's see here. And Osei Can You See says, definitely a government untrue event, because for some reason that's like one of those phrases that just tanks everything you do afterwards. So I try to avoid it when I can. In the large scheme of things, that van load was really not a lot. I mean, but Paladin 1, the problem is that those vans aren't rated to be able to carry 10,000 pounds. In fact, they're generally rated for the best like van you can buy in that size and weight class can carry like 6,500 pounds, right? So that's a huge amount of overweight load, which creates a lot of issues regarding the vehicle's structural integrity and everything else, right? So like, I'm not saying they couldn't have done it and they couldn't have possibly made it, but they're driving from state to state, so this wasn't like just down the block, And I mean, and this looks like an older vehicle too, right? So like, there's a good chance like the suspension goes out, the shocks completely flattened. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that that's like a reasonable thing to assume it could have accomplished easily, right? Now, here's some things I want you to keep in mind. What does the cartel do with this ammunition? Well, I just told you about their training, and I honestly believe that's what they were doing. I think they were training with live targets. It's messed up, but it also should tell you that like if you ever found yourself in a situation where these people were like a threat to your community and they decided to declare war on like a town or something like that, I mean, that's what they're willing to do. So like you're never going to be as mentally or physically prepared as these people are to do the things that they're willing to do, which is okay, but it's something that you should admit now and be aware of now, so that way if things ever do happen, you know what lengths they're willing to go to and you know what you're up against, so that way you don't make bad decisions in the event that you might have to make a decision, if that makes any sense. So, and that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to share this information. Now, Nick says, thanks for the super chat, by the way. I really appreciate you. And you're always supportive, and I appreciate that. I think people don't really understand how bad cartel members are. Rifles and pistols and tons of ammo don't protect you if they really target you. Magic let them know how bad they are. Well, and that's part of my goal. What I'm trying to do is like let everybody know like this is a real threat, and it's a very overwhelming and powerful threat that like the average person, myself included, is not prepared for. The best we can do is train up our basic skills so that way if like we have the equipment, but we also have the skills to not have to process those basics during a stressful and panic situation, right? And obviously you shouldn't panic, but you might. And if you have those basics really drilled in and all the elementary things figured out about, how to use your equipment and what equipment you're using, then you don't have to think as much, which makes everything a lot easier, right? And that's one of the things, like I'll just touch on real quick before we jump into this next concept, is that sometimes limiting yourself and minimalizing some of your kit or some of your gear is a good thing to do, so that way you remove those questions you might have in the heat of the moment, right? If you only have one, let's just put it like really simple, right? If you have one rifle and one handgun and one plate carrier, and and that's all you have, then like there's no hesitation or no thought of like what I need for this situation or anything like that. And I do envy people like that sometimes, because like I overdo it. I just do. It's just part of what I do. I have a hobby and a passion and everything else. But at the same time, like, would you want to open your safe and be like, all right, the cartel's here. What am I grabbing, right? Like, that's not a good feeling, and that's not a good place to be. So, limiting yourself can definitely be beneficial in those situations at times in order to make sure there is no choice to make. The choice is made for you. And I think that there's a lot of benefits to that, not to mention the amount of training on one platform and everything else related to it. So just want to throw that out there, okay? Now, guys, and this is why I might not be the best guy for people to sponsor and everything else all the time, because like I always say these things like, well, maybe you don't need all that stuff, and then everyone gets mad at me. So all right, now also I tell you guys the truth about equipment when it does work and when it doesn't work, and that also causes problems too. So, but I'm not willing to change on that, and I'm also not willing to tell you something that's not accurate if at all possible. And when I say at all possible, it means that I just don't, if I say something I don't know or I'm wrong about, then that's a different situation where I could go back and correct that. But in general, from my knowledge, I'm never going to tell you something that's untrue. As a former policeman and military instructor, be gray man, hide Glock, look meek. Yeah, well, it's always good to just blend in, of course. Now, and thanks again for the super chat, Nick. Really appreciate you as always. Here's some things to think about, okay? When they're transporting large amounts of ammunition in the country and what they're getting prepared for, who knows exactly, but one of the reasons why they might be doing these things is preparing for possible confrontations. Now, they use the ammunition they smuggle into Mexico for this exact reason, to prepare for confrontations with the Mexican military and law enforcement, okay? And this is what has happened there a couple times, okay? And so this can happen here. People don't think it can, but it most certainly can. And the thing that you have to think about is that the cartel has already figured out that they could do this in Mexico, and it really didn't cause them a lot of problems. So what do you think they'll think about doing stuff like that here? And they also know our laws. Like they study U.S. law. They understand what it is that we are and are not willing to do or capable of in order to be as close to that edge as possible and to abuse any loopholes that might exist, right? And so they know, like, we're not supposed to be using military strikes here on the homeland, right? They know that there's limitations on what we can do in the sense of use of force. So they're going to exploit that. So just think about this as these things progress. Cartel lays siege to Mexican City after recapture of the son of El Chapo. Okay, now this is from 2023, and this happened, and I remember when this was happening because it got a little bit crazy, and you could watch it like on TV. Armed men took hostages, burned vehicles, and stormed an airport in northern Mexico on Thursday after federal forces captured Ovidio Guzman, one of the world's most wanted cartel leaders and the son of the imprisoned drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The 33-year-old drug boss was arrested after a pre-dawn gunfight in a town north of the city of Culiacan, a stronghold of the Guzman-Sinaloa cartel. Even as the cartel mounted attacks across the state, the Air Force was able to fly the younger Guzman to Mexico City, said Mexican Secretary of Defense Luis Crescencio Sandoval Gonzalez. Officials canceled flights, suspended school, and ordered residents to shelter in place as cartel members threw up road blockades in multiple cities, injuring at least 25 security forces and killing one. In Culiacan, Sandoval said cartel fighters blocked all 6 entrances to the city and attacked a commercial airport and a nearby Air Force base. At least one commercial flight and an Air Force plane were hit with gunfire, officials said. The cartel response appeared modeled after a bloody siege on Culiacan in 2019, the last time federal forces sought to capture Ovidio Guzman. Okay? Now, that did happen in 2019 as well. And we can talk about that here really quick, okay? How the Sinaloa cartel bested the Mexican army. This is a Time article from 2019. Yes, we go back in time on this channel sometimes to build context and to give you historical evidence as to why some of these things might be concerning or relevant to our current state of preparedness. Also, if you are here on Replay Crew, thank you so much for always checking back in the comments and just coming back to listen to the information, because you guys are amazing and I really appreciate you all. Also, if you don't mind helping out the channel, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here because we do this once a week on Monday nights. And make sure you share this video with friends who might benefit from the information because, well, without your help, it's definitely not getting out there. And I could use your assistance, so I appreciate it. In Mexico's big cities, drug cartel gunmen normally act like phantoms. They hide in safe houses or amid communities, suddenly striking with an assassination or a gunfight and then disappearing again. Residents know they are there and are scared, but most of the time they can't see them. This is accurate to your neighborhood right now. Regardless of where you live, the cartels are operating in your area. Okay, they might not be in your exact neighborhood or your exact cul-de-sac, but they're in your community in some form or fashion. And this is usually how they act, as phantoms. But on Thursday in the Sinaloan city of Culiacan, the cartel gunmen were everywhere. They openly drove in trucks with mounted machine guns, blockaded streets, flashing their Kalashnikovs, and burned trucks, unleashing plumes of smoke like it was a scene in Syria. They took control of the strategic points in the metro area, shut down the airport, roads, and government buildings, and exchanged fire with security forces for hours, leaving at least 8 people dead. In contrast, everyone else had to act like ghosts, hiding behind locked doors, not daring to step outside. And in this unusual battle, the Sinaloa cartel won. Their uprising was in response to soldiers storming a house on Thursday and arresting Ovidio Guzman, the 28-year-old son of convicted kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. In February, the U.S. Justice Department announced it had indicted Ovidio Guzman on trafficking cocaine, marijuana, and meth. But after hours of cartel chaos, Mexico's federal government gave soldiers the go-ahead to release him. It capitulated. What did they learn from that, right? They learned they could win against the Mexican military and force them to do what they wanted by laying siege on the city. And the problem with the cartels is they don't operate with the same set of codes as a military or police force. They're going to use whatever leverage they have to get their way. And for them, that leverage is going to include things like, I don't know, hurting civilians. So these are all things that you should definitely be considering for why they might have all this ammunition. And here's another consideration for you, okay? They don't sell to rival cartels. They don't smuggle ammo across the border to sell it to other cartels, right, to make a profit. That's not good business, right? Here's my enemy. Here's some ammo, right? We talk about that in the preparedness community a lot. If you're bartering ammo in an emergency, it better be with fellow community members who you already have a relationship and a trust bond with. You should not just sell ammo to randos off the street in the middle of an emergency, right? That's a bad idea. And the cartels don't do that either. They use the ammo for themselves to be ready to fight other cartels, to deal with the Mexican military and law enforcement, and for training, which we just talked about. So the other thing for you to consider with why they'd be buying so much ammo, 180,000 rounds of 308, possibly. We're going to caveat everything with that tonight because like that, the story is just not, there's something not right there. But regardless, okay, they're going to Pueblo, Colorado. They're not going to Mexico this time, and they have a lot of ammo with them. So if everything's to be believed at face value, why would they be doing this? Well, they're stockpiling. Why would they stockpile? To get ahead of increased enforcement or geopolitical instability. Ammo goes scarce sometimes even here in the States, right? As we saw during 2020. And it's possible they might just be getting ready for whatever happens in the future. Maybe they don't have a plan quite yet, but they do understand that ammo might be scarce regardless of what happens between now and whenever that plan they develop goes into action. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that they might be why we lose access to ammo. They might be aware of things happening in our own government for why we might lose access to ammo. I don't know, but they have much better connections than both you and I. And they understand that having a stockpile of ammunition stored away is beneficial in the long run. And it's also possible they're stockpiling it to sell later or to smuggle later, right? So there's a lot of considerations here. But there are some things that I want to talk about regarding why they might feel the need to be stockpiling that much ammunition at this point in time, okay? Also, Eric Toro says they're all over. It could be your mechanic or your waiter. And this is true. This is true. And I've worked in the restaurant business long enough to tell you that I've definitely worked with some gang members at some different points in time in different locations, especially in California. And yeah, I mean, the affiliations are likely there, and it's best just not to be aware of them in many ways, right? So that does happen. Cartel just got busted in Memphis, says Silent Guard. I'm about 4.5 hours away, 4 to 5 hours away. Yeah, well, Memphis has a lot of problems, and Memphis definitely needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to get cleaned up. I have a feeling it's just going to, unfortunately, get worse, kind of like Oakland, California. You know, like Oakland is like the future of every major city that is falling to the wayside currently, right? Let's see here. Hansy Hands Driscoll. Hello from a small town in Northern California mountains. Ain't none of them going to do anything here. It'd be a slaughter. Everyone is well armed here. I have to disagree with you, Hansy. I'm sorry. I get it. I used to live in a small town in Northern California in the mountains, literally. The cartels already operate weed farms there. The cartels have a massive presence in the mountains in Northern California, especially in the Mendocino area. And the cartels are armed and patrolling their properties all of the time. People disappear, and they're well organized and well coordinated, and they have a lot of money and a lot of resources that most other people don't have. So being armed to the teeth isn't a prerequisite to survival when a well-organized and well-resourced force decides to get rid of you. You have to have a lot more in your favor than that. You have to have organization and community and groups, and you have to have the wherewithal and everything else related to it. And even if you do, they are still going to outfinance you. So I get where you're coming from, and I lived in a community that was very similar, I'm sure, where a lot of people were well armed and a lot of people had that mindset, and I agree with the mindset, but never underestimate your enemy. Like the cartel is the one group of people in this country you should not underestimate. They will do way more damage than you could possibly consider based on the fact that they're doing it, right? Your whole neighborhood could be armed militiamen who go out and train on the weekends, and they're still not going to have access to what the cartel has, right? And you could be well trained and have your AR or whatever it is you got, but they have mounted 50 cal machine guns that they don't care about getting in trouble for. So like I get it, and like I said, I'm like from your area. I lived there for many years. I owned a home in the mountains in Northern California. And the cartels are there, and they're there in force, and there's a lot of them, and they're very well armed. And I have seen them personally, and it's scary. And I just don't want you to be overconfident. I want you to be realistic about that threat because I just don't want to see anybody get hurt. So we need to kind of move away from that mindset of like, well, me and my buddies are well armed, so I'd like to see them try something. Because the reality of it is if they do try something, it's already over for you unless you have a really well-established SOP of what to do in a situation where that occurs, right? And most of us just don't have that because it's not something we can invest the amount of time and resources required for, which is why we have law enforcement, right? Those are the people we try to rely on if things like that start to happen. But it's unfortunately not always under their control either, and sometimes they're corrupted as well, right? So this is why it's such a big deal. That's why I try to bring so much attention to it. It's just like we have to be ready for stuff like this to occur with these people because it's very possible, right? So let's keep moving, all right? Paladin 1 says we do still have Chuck Norris and Hulk Hogan, so there is some truth to that. Skin of a hot dog, you can't go wrong. All right, let's go ahead and talk about why they might be stockpiling now and why they might be making these moves now, okay? This just came out 8 days ago from the Homeland Security Office, right? 100 days of the most secure border in American history. The squeeze is on, and when the squeeze is on, things start happening faster and with more desperation, and they could be preparing for direct interaction with our law enforcement and possibly military here in the near future. This foreign terrorist organization declaration is a big deal for them, regardless of what you think about it. Like for them, it means like they're basically at war with us now. And so that could be why they needed so much ammunition here in the States rather than going south of the border as usual. And here's also why, okay? The Biden administration refused to enforce our nation's laws when it came to border security. This allowed millions of illegal aliens, including criminals, gang members, and terrorists, into our country. But in just 100 days, President Trump and Secretary Noem have not only closed our border, but have delivered the most secure border in American history. Now, if these numbers are accurate, which, I mean, I have to assume they are because that's what they're reporting. I can't verify them myself, but U.S. Customs and Border Protection has now total control of the border. Daily border encounters are down by 93%. Encounters with gotaways, the top threat to public safety, are down by 95%. And migrant crossings are down 99.99%. Average border encounters under Biden, the average number of monthly border encounters was nearly 160,000. The daily average peaked at 15,000. In total, CBP recorded approximately 11 million border encounters over the course of Biden's 4 years. Okay. Now we're at the average border encounters of the Trump administration. March of 2025 saw the lowest monthly number of border encounters in recorded history at less than 7,200. The lowest daily number of border encounters in February of 2025 fell to less than 200. Okay, so here's the thing. Operation Tidal Wave is in full motion. Operation Tidal Wave is a preview of what is to come around the country. Large-scale operations that employ our state and local law enforcement partners to get criminal illegal aliens off our streets. This is a first-of-its-kind multi-agency immigration enforcement operation under the 287G program coordinated by ICE with state and federal partners. In less than 100 days, the Trump administration has seen a 317% increase in federal and state partner agreements. This multi-day operation has so far resulted in 780 illegal aliens apprehended in just 4 days. Arrests include members of MS-13, murderers, rapists, drug traffickers, and human rights abusers. So the squeeze is on. Things have gotten very tight. And operations might stay insulated now because crossing the border has become increasingly more difficult and smuggling operations have become more difficult, and they're being targeted directly by our law enforcement and, in some ways, the military, at least using certain assets in regards to the border itself. So they could be stockpiling in order to ride it out. For all we know, they're just buying up ammo to have it ready to go after 4 years is over to see how things go. Or they could be stockpiling in anticipation for a face-off when we come in and get rid of the wrong person. As you saw in Mexico, all it took was arresting the son of El Chapo for things to boil over. And maybe we've avoided that as of right now, arresting low-level gang members and criminals and things of that nature. But what happens when they grab somebody with a little bit of notoriety or authority? What happens when they grab somebody's son or nephew or uncle or cousin or brother, right? And when will they decide that they're going to get them back? And so what jurisdiction would this person be arrested in? Where would they be located? Where would they be being held? And would that area and that particular facility be targeted? I don't know, but I do know that those things are real possibilities of occurrences, right? So the thing about the 180,000 rounds of ammo is that, yes, if that is accurate and if it was designated to arrive in a location here in the U.S., that's concerning. Their ability to be better equipped than us is concerning. As a prepared citizen, I'm upset that the cartel can just, buy fully automatic machine guns and employ them against me, and I'm not allowed to, even though I'm protected by the Second Amendment, right? So that's upsetting to me and concerning. I also find it upsetting that if I buy, a certain amount of handguns or rifles within the same period of time, like 30 days, I get flagged by the ATF. But these guys can go buy 180,000 rounds of ammo at a gun store in Utah and load them in the back of a rental van or whatever it was, just a used car they bought, and just drive away, right? So I'm a little concerned about some of that, and I'm also concerned about what they might use the ammunition for in the future. And I think one of the biggest issues is what nefarious purposes the inconsistent reporting on said story could be, considering we don't usually have that many inconsistencies, right? Especially from a story that originates out of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I find that to be very odd. Lefty GR, member for 40 months. Thank you so much for hanging out and being here for so long, man. That's crazy. What an achievement in the sense of of your support. I really appreciate it. This is why we prepare for the unknown. Maybe a natural disaster, maybe extended power outage. Could be something else. Please smash the like button. Well, thank you so much for that statement, Lefty GR, and I agree with you. We prepare for all things, right? The most likely thing that's going to happen is your power goes out. The infrastructure fails, there's a storm, the power lines touch during a windstorm or whatever. That happens, right? And so have ways to deal with that, and you'll be better off in a majority of emergencies that we face on a regular basis. And then, you make sure you have water to drink and food to eat, right? These are basics, and then get more advanced because of these existential threats that are less likely, but becoming more likely as time goes on, just based on the current state of things, right? And so, listen, if you guys want, I could have talked about what just happened with the Houthis all night long, right? And, we'll get back to that topic eventually. But that is literally so far away and so unlikely to affect us directly here in the U.S. right this second that it almost feels like wasting time. Because in reality, until something more escalatory occurs over there, it's just a business as usual at this point, right? It is what it is. It was my expectation that we're going to see a war between Iran and Israel and likely the U.S. at the same time, becoming more and more of a reality. Sure. Writing's kind of on the wall, right? Do I want that to happen? No. I'd like our resources to remain where they need to be. But are there reasons it could need to happen that I just might not be privy to because of my low-level position as a civilian? Yeah, I can admit that. And there's always things happening behind the scenes that we aren't aware of that I have to take into consideration before developing a very strong opinion or stance on something, just out of the fact that I don't like it. So these are all things that I think about. But in all honesty, the cartels being in the country, operating the way that they are, moving ammo around from state to state rather than from the U.S. to Mexico, the training camps that they're using down south of the border with likely live targets being employed. Yeah, there's a lot of concern there. There's a lot of problems I have with all that. DB Cooper, thank you so much for joining the channel membership. I really appreciate the support, and I want you to know something. If you join the channel membership, you have access to the private live stream, which starts in about 15 minutes. So if you want to be in the private live stream tonight, either join the channel membership by hitting the join button down below, right underneath me, wherever that thingy is, or you can join the Subscribe Star, which is $5 a month. It's a way to directly support the channel. I do post additional content on there from time to time. Not as much as I should and not as much as I'd like to, but I do. And I also have access in the sense of direct messaging there too, in case you need to ask me questions directly or have anything you want to run by me and stuff. It's a great way to maintain communication while also supporting the channel, and it's greatly appreciated. So just put that link in the live chat. You can also access my website from the description, as well as just going to magicprepper.com, which has all of the ways you can support the channel right then and there, including affiliate links, discount codes. There's even lists of how I set up my rifles and stuff like that may or may not give you directions of where to get everything you might like. So please check that out. And yes, be aware of what the cartels are up to. Be aware of these movements. Be aware of the change of trends there. If ammo always goes south of the border, and then the biggest amount of ammo we've ever heard of getting pulled over here stateside is going somewhere else in the States, yeah, that should open some eyes. That should be a red flag. Also, read the story yourself. Read the information and do a little additional research and ask yourself, does this make sense? Does all this add up? Why is this being reported the way it is? Why is it possible for this van to have that much weight in the back? Or even the volume to carry that much ammo, right? These are all questions you should ask because clearly there's something wrong there. And I think that we're aware of it now, but I don't have the answers as to why. So let me know down in the chat, in the comments section after this replay is over, what you think is going on with all that, because I'm honestly not 100% sure. I gave you my speculations, but it is what it is. And of course, I always look forward to these Monday live streams. You guys are very awesome for being here. You're very awesome for supporting the live stream the way that you do. And I appreciate the information being shared out to more prepared-minded citizens and individuals because these are the things we should consider. And these are the things that, when it comes to the Minuteman stuff, when it comes to the firearms and the kit and the gear and the first aid and everything else, these are the real threats that you should be considering, likelihood-wise. And then you can go on to the Red Dawn stuff, which is way more interesting. I know Red Dawn Readiness was here tonight, so there you go. That stuff is way more interesting, and I really appreciate it. But likelihood-wise, The cartel guys are a lot more of a probable threat. So, let's see here. Eric El Toros, give my regards to Lee from PN. I'm wondering do you mean Prepper now? Because I could do that. And if you don't mean that, then I apologize. So let's see here. Well, thanks, Magic Prepper. I feel it was time well wasted as well. Well, thanks, Savagely. I appreciate that. You're amazing. All right. I'm out of here. You guys enjoy the rest of your Monday night. If you're on the private live stream, I look forward to seeing you here in just a few minutes. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.